Hey everyone, welcome back to Wednesday Night Live here with you. We've had some technical difficulties today, but we are here. We are together online, and I'm in a quite familiar spot. Some of you may know there's a clock right above me here. There's a doorway right behind me, a little calendar on the wall. Rolly chairs. I think you might know where I am. But hey, we want to start a new series tonight. And for a good bit of the fall, we're going to be talking about some of the basics here of what we believe and what Christianity is and what kind of makes it all up. What I wanted to do for the first few weeks here is talk about, the biggest centric here is God, right? And who is he? And what does the Bible say about him? And I wanted to start off with a few weeks on kind of some of the names of God and how he describes himself. And there's actually a passage that we're going to be in for the next few weeks. It's actually in the book of Exodus. It's just the second book of the Bible in the Old Testament. Genesis, Exodus. And God is revealing himself to Moses. And we'll get into a little bit about that. But he says some things about himself. He calls himself certain names. And we want to go over those just to kind of get a well-rounded picture of who God says he is and what it means for us in our lives as well as we navigate our life and as we navigate this possible relationship with Christ that we have, and what does it mean to walk in that, and what does it mean to be a Christian, and what do we really believe, and where does it start? So without further ado, I don't know if you guys ever do this, but sometimes I'm on YouTube and I go down a YouTube hole of watching videos, right? And like 2 hours later, you're like, oh my goodness, it's been 2 hours and I'm watching YouTube. But sometimes I come across some of these famous musicians, and they're doing like live concerts, and they're just wailing away on the guitar and guitar solos and putting it behind their heads and like putting it behind their back. And I go like, man, I feel really, really inadequate at playing the guitar, right? So like I taught myself how to play the guitar many, many, many years ago. Played every Sunday, as I lead worship and whatnot. But some of these guys, it's even kids. Sometimes I'll see videos of kids shredding on the guitar. There's like 10-year-old kids, and here I am at like 36 years old, and I'm like, I just want to put my guitar down and never play it again, right? So sometimes I feel very inadequate in certain areas, in certain ways. Excuse me. So I don't know if you guys have ever felt that before in your life, inadequate. And that's a big word. If for some of you who may not know what inadequate means, it means that you don't feel like you're very good at something, or if you tried it, you wouldn't do well at it. You would fail. You feel like that someone else can do it better, so why even try? And we want to see here in the passage that we're about to read. Moses kind of feels this way, and God just talks him through, and we'll see what that looks like. So like I said, we're going to be spending a few weeks in the book of Exodus, specifically in chapter 3, but I want to set the scene a little bit. So the book of Genesis was written, right? And at the end of Genesis, if you remember, Joseph saved his family from the famine by having grain for Jacob and all of his sons. They all moved to Egypt to all live happily ever after as a family. And then at the beginning of the book of Exodus, we see that it's now 400 years later. The Israelites, the Hebrews, were slaves in Egypt. And Moses was on the run because he murdered an Egyptian. So he was living out in the wilderness tending sheep. So here's kind of the scene that we set here. It's been a long time after the book of Genesis, after Joseph saved his family from the famine. And we see this guy, Moses, and he's on the run. He killed an Egyptian. He's a Hebrew. He's on the run. He's living in the wilderness. And we pick up in chapter 3, and we're going to read quite a long passage here, but we'll break it up. So we're going to read verses 1 through 6 in chapter 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Now, let's stop there for a second. Why was this such a huge deal? Well, remember, this is about 400 years after the book of Exodus, and God hasn't really revealed himself in such a long period of time. But in this moment, while Moses was on the run from murdering an Egyptian, he's living in the desert, he's tending his father-in-law's sheep, he's just out and about doing his thing. God decides to show up in a burning bush. Now, the bush doesn't burn away, right? And Moses comes up to this bush after being called, and God says, Here I am the God of Isaac, Abraham, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses would have known what this meant. This was God, right? This is the God of the Hebrews, of the Israelites. And so God revealed himself, which probably means he was about to do something major. And for those who already know where this is going, eventually, we know that he does. So let's continue on. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their sufferings. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But, Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? Now, let's stop here real quick. Now, this is a pretty valid question, right? God basically hasn't revealed himself in about 400 years. His people, they still knew him, but they didn't really know him. And his people were in slavery to the Egyptians, right? So God's about to give Moses the first name that we hear him call himself. And we're going to talk a little bit about what this means. But this is a big deal. This is major. So we're going to read on. We're going to read verses 14 and 15. God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. Now, did you catch that? He called himself I am. I am has sent you. So he says, tell everybody, I am has sent you. Now, what does that even mean? Well, first off, as we have this translated into English, the word, the phrase I am, this word picture is as a form of the Hebrew word meaning to be. So I am means he exists, but it is just more than that. He is self-existent. So God is saying, I am, I exist, I am here, I am self-existent. Now, this is a little different than what we're used to because, we as humans, we're not just, we just don't poof appear one day on earth, right? So there has to be a reason for our existence, right? So we're born, from a mother, and there's a reason why we're here. We were created in a certain way, so that we can explain our existence as we were not at one time, and now we are because of being created and because of having an explanation for our existence. But as a contrast, God didn't just poof out of nowhere. God always was, right? He always is. He always will be. There was never just not God and then God. God always was. He wasn't created. He wasn't born. He just always was. God doesn't require anything to keep existing, right? We need food, water, air, oxygen, all this stuff. Like, we need things to exist. God needs nothing to exist. He always was, always is, always will be. So that is what we're talking about him saying, I am. It's more than just I exist and I always have. I am implies activity. God is doing something when he reveals himself. And we see here, and we're about to see as we continue on in these next few weeks, what God is going to do. And we know, most of us know, how he liberates the Israelites from the Egyptians. But I am is such a powerful first statement. God is other, right? He is holy. He is set apart, right? And we're called to be set apart like that if we are part of his children. God is, Moses felt inadequate, right? Well, who am I, God? Who am I? He said, who am I? And who should I tell them sent me? And that's when he responds, I am. So Moses was inadequate, but God is so fully sufficient for what we need. Moses was asking, who am I? God is, I am. And we are the same as Moses, right? So sometimes this can be a hard concept for us because our finite minds, our small minds, don't always comprehend this notion of eternity, of just foreverness, of just existence, and never ending. It's hard to wrap our minds around sometimes. But what God is saying here is that he is always existent. He is sufficient. He is enough. He is everything that we need. He is I am. And that's just such a sobering fact to think about it as we think about who God is. He was always. And a little bit of what we talked about last week, he will always be. He will be our rock. He will never leave nor forsake. He is enough for everything we need. And this is what he was saying to Moses in this moment. So God gets it, right? God is a provider. He is, I am. He controls eternity. He takes care of his people. God is sovereign. What we mean by God is sovereign, he is over everything that happens. And what he wills happens. Sometimes he allows things to happen to us in our lives so that we can have more faith and more trust and run to him. We think about the story of Jesus, and he gave his life, as Scripture says, at just the right time. He wasn't necessarily the king that people expected, but he was the king that people needed. And he's the king that we need. And what happened with Christ, with Jesus, is he came down. He was God's son. He came down as a man from heaven and walked 33 years in this life. And when it came time, he carried his cross to the hill at Calvary. He was nailed to it, put a crown of thorns on his head. And when it came time, it said that he relinquished his spirit. He gave up his spirit because he knew what God needed of him. And he gave his life. All of our sin, past, present, future, was put on him in that moment. And he shed that blood. He was that one-time sacrifice that we needed so that we can be together with God again for all eternity. So that we can have right standing in God's eyes. He is enough. And that was a picture, in the New Testament is the same as God saying, I am to Moses, and God is enough to Moses. So God called Moses not because of who Moses was, but because of who God is. His name is I am. Right? And he will take care of everything. So we say, okay, well, what is our role in this? Well, our role in this is a lot like what Moses' role is or was. And that wasn't to be the person to do everything. That wasn't to be the Savior. That wasn't to be God. Moses' role, our role, is to be available, to be able to be used by God, to be able to be worked in by God, to be able to be worked through by God, by I am, by the one that is self-sufficient, by the one that was always existed and wants to use us, not needs. He doesn't need us, but he wants to use us in his redeeming work, in bringing people back to him. And this was one of the first times of doing that. He wanted to set his people free that were being oppressed by the Egyptians. And he took this guy Moses from out in the wilderness and he said, you are the guy to do it. And Moses tried all the excuses. I don't know. Who do I tell him sent me? I am. The one that has always existed. The one that is forever sufficient for everything we need. I am who I am. I am sending you. And you will have everything you need because I am will provide. And I am is sufficient for everything that you will need for this. And the other thing we can do other than being available is submitting to God. Because when we submit to him, we understand that he will take care of us. Now, that doesn't mean he will give us everything we want or everything we think we need, but he will provide for us what we need in the time in which we need it, which sometimes is way out of our timing. But he will always be faithful in taking care of his people, as we see by liberating from them from the Egyptian rule. So, just a few questions as we end out our time today. What do you need to trust I am with today? Your time? Maybe a relationship struggle? Maybe your parents? Maybe your siblings? Something that isn't going your way, no matter how hard you're trying to make it happen? What are some things that you need to give over to God, to I am, to the all-sufficient one that is sufficient enough, that will give us everything we need when we need it, that is enough for us in our life? What do you need to give up to him today and able to start being used by him in your life, in your family's life, in your friend's life, in your neighbor's life, in your community, whatever it may be? What do we need to give up today to I am so that we can say, yes, I am here, I am available, I want to trust you, and I want to do what you need me to do? Submit to God. Do what he has called us to do. Love him and trust him. That's everything that I have for you guys tonight. So remember, the first name that God even mentions himself to Moses is I am. And he is there for you as well. So have a wonderful night, and we'll see you next week.